Welcome to the Grace Hour, a daily program that takes a dive into the believer's daily challenges and helps them learn his faith in a practical way. My name is Pastor Jason Moore, and I'm joined in the studio today by Anna Braganza. Very excited about our theme today, Anna, on anxiety.
Yes.
And I think sometimes as believers, we can struggle with, is anxiety right? Is it sin? Is it something normal?
Mm-hmm.
And I know a lot of people, and you know a lot of people that struggle with this tension, this emotional tension that's very naturally in our landscape these days. So as we open this up today, I'm very excited what God will do, how God will minister.
Mm-hmm.
So thanks for being with us today.
Well, first of all, thank you for having me. This is a huge honor, and I'm very excited about this opportunity. And Happy New Year.
Thank
you.
you.
To you and your family.
Yeah,
to everyone here. It's an awesome time to be here at Greater Grace. So first of all, when we're talking about anxiety, I think we need to recognize that there's no point in administering CPR to someone who's living and they're bleeding to death, right? So the deepest need that an individual has is to be saved. You must be born again, right? And that is the first point that we have to make when we're talking about anxiety, because biblical truths are useful for an unsaved person, right? They are a blessing for an unsaved person, and they can bring order to life. But to us, with the Spirit of God living in us, it is life. And when we're looking for answers for anxiety, we look to the Word, and we don't lean on the secular understanding of what the treatment for anxiety is. So let's qualify that. And today we're speaking to the saved people. If you are not saved, you must be born again.
Amen.
That's my first, for anxiety, that's my first advice. But isn't it interesting that as Christians, we feel guilty when we feel anxious because of that one verse, which is be anxious for nothing. And we kind of, I think, tend to treat that as a fix all. You know, you just throw that at a situation. What does it really mean when you say be anxious for nothing? So I think we'll kind of unpack that today, what it means to really not be anxious for anything. And I think for the believer, this has to do with the process of sanctification. Is that it's to know God in the situation, to understand what that situation, the purpose of the situation, and the purpose of the emotion that follows the situation. And God has given clear guidelines in the Bible for both, I think, for us to understand. So,
yes.
I think to start off with, first of all, what is anxiety? Different anxiety and worry we have to understand that it's not a sin. Anxiety in itself is just an emotion. It is a symptom, a response to a situation, or a person, or maybe a situation that's about to happen, like I was anxious about coming on today. But that doesn't mean that I'm living in sin if you have a little bit of anxiety in your life. According to the American Psychological Association, I'm just going to quote them a little bit here.
Sure.
Anxiety is an emotion characterized by feelings of tension, worried thoughts, and physical changes like increased blood pressure. We all know that, especially with this recent couple years of COVID, we've all experienced certain levels of anxiety, I'm sure.
Sure.
Of the fear of the unknown, what could happen to ourselves and our loved ones. And for some, it's gone to like a disorder, you know, where they're really living with fear on a daily basis. And that can happen to a believer or an unbeliever. And I think we're at an epidemic level with the anxiety that's in the world today. So I think it's God's heart to give us definition about what anxiety is and how we can learn to take responsibility for our own emotions.
Yeah.
I think that's where we should probably start, is just defining what anxiety is and some of the reasons for anxiety. Yeah.
I mean, just hearing you speak, I know you're studying this. You're in the process of getting your degree in counseling. And I think we can certainly approach it from a couple different angles, but I love how you started this, the emotion of tension, you know, and especially with all the change of COVID and just people losing their jobs, losing their houses. Some people have had to relocate. Some people, a lot of young people have no real confidence in the future because they're afraid, am I going to get sick? Am I going to lose everything? Is there going to be some sort of loss in my life? And I think life change is inevitable. It's how we respond to it.
Yes.
So anxiety, I like what you said, it's not sin, but it's like anything. How do I respond? How do I think? How do I process these emotions that God gave us? Emotions are beautiful, right?
Yes.
They're meant to appreciate the things of God. We're meant to appreciate nature, people, and situations, but stress, right? Trying to internalize those things that are not able to be changed, for instance, and anxiety could be like the mood of stress.
Yes.
Some have said.
Yes.
And then, of course, it can lead into the disorder of panic.
Yes.
And being gripped and paralyzed.
Yes.
Where we've both seen that, where people can't think straight.
Yeah.
They're in a place of like, oh gosh, I am like so small. I am like in my house. I have a phobia of some sort. I can't leave my house or something. Or I have a people phobia, or you can't touch people. It's a brave new world. I don't know if it's a brave new world. It's a strange new world.
Yes.
You know?
Yeah, I agree with you. I think the reasons, like when you were thinking about the reasons for anxiety, I was just jotting down a few things that like really resonated with me personally. Maybe a death of a loved one is a huge one. That just hits you out of the blue sometimes and can cause a lot of anxiety. Elderly parents, how about that one? Like, how am I going to take care of my parents? What's going to happen? Things that come up with that. Change in job, you mentioned, change or a loss of a job during COVID. How about raising children?
There you go.
That's
like the toughest job you'll ever love right there.
Like, what am I supposed to do?
Yeah.
These kids didn't come with a manual,
right.
And all of a sudden I need to raise them and train them up in the Lord and teach them good habits. And that can cause a lot of anxiety for parents, just changing in family life. Marriage is a big one, finances, health crisis, we all know a little bit about health crisis, the economy, and how about this one? This is a good one today, current events.
Yeah.
How about just turning the news on in the morning and filling your being, your spirit up with anxiety because you're hearing about what's going on in the world. And so is the solution to that just to turn off the TV, or is there something else that God shows us in the Bible about anxiety that we could maybe look at as being the solution here?
Yeah, absolutely. You quoted Philippians 4:7, do all things with prayer and supplication, to be anxious for nothing.
Yeah.
I think, as we look at current events, I mean, we could walk through that, but we won't. But there are some obvious ones like, how do I relate to that? How do I function if things can go very wrong? Like we could say that there's a great struggle in our lives internally, externally, but the struggle is not sin. I like how you brought that up. It's how I respond to it, how I think about it. So anxiety is what could go wrong and maybe my response to it. But fear, right? Fear is kind of this emotion of self-consciousness, awareness without God. It's me, you, it's the listener today. How do I actually function when I feel or we feel that we don't have the power to change what's going on?
Yes.
But in Philippians 4:7, prayer is a great diffuser for anxiety.
Yes.
Also, the psalmist says in 94:19, he says this, in the multitude of my anxieties within me, you comfort and delight my soul. So in the multitude of anxieties, so there can be tons, like you just gave a good list. I mean, raising kids, I have a 9-year-old, you have some adult kids. You have 4 kids, right?
3 adult, 5 kids.
There you go, 5, there it is. Wow.
Yeah.
But God gives you, he delights your soul with his words, his truth, and with his perspective.
Yes.
I think that's a big one.
Yes.
Do I have God's perspective on my situation? Do I have God's perspective about my marriage, about my family, about my job? Do I have God's perspective? Because when we have his eyes and ears and his thoughts, then we're able to process things in a limitless way. Like we're limited, so we can kind of be very self-aware of our limitations. But then God's like, okay, I'm going to step in and I'm going to do great things that you know not of.
Yeah. And isn't it wonderful that we do have this symptom of anxiety in the world to point us towards God. On the other hand, it is wonderful that we have it, and it is a gift from God to us to show. It's almost like a thermometer that something is going on. There's inflammation, but we have to remember that it's only the symptom. It is not the problem. And that's a good segue into talking about the secular way of looking at it, because, we're going to make a lot of enemies by talking about it this way, because the answers for anxiety come from the Bible. Their true answer for anxiety come from the Word of God. And the secular therapy offers two solutions to anxiety. They either try to eliminate the triggers. So they look at your situation, what's triggering this response of anxiety in your life. And then they try to manage symptoms, which in the worst case scenario is medicating you. And I'm not a medical doctor, and I am not saying anything about anybody's treatment today. And I don't want there to be any confusion in that we want everyone to make that decision with their own healthcare professionals. However, I'm talking about people who are owning a personality of being worried and anxious, and it kind of exalts itself above the knowledge of God, which is a wonderful verse in the Bible. 2 Corinthians 10:5, casting down imagination and every high thing that exalts itself against the knowledge of God, and bringing into captivity every thought to the obedience of Christ. And so there we read that sin, anything, including anxiety, anything that exalts itself above the knowledge of God is sin in my life, right? So are we saying now all of a sudden that anxiety is sin? Are we backtracking what we were saying earlier, that it's not sin? I think that it's really important to understand that even in the church, we can take this two-way approach to managing anxiety, and we can say that let's talk to a person and try to eliminate the triggers in their lives. If we're doing marriage counseling or family counseling, let's try to eliminate triggers that cause, anger or whatever. Or let's try to manage the symptoms by just throwing a verse there and saying, be anxious for nothing.
Sure.
And you should be good. Why aren't you not anxious? Why are you not dealing with your anxiety? There's a verse in the Bible, but there's a disconnect there, something that's just not clicking, because I think this is the key, is that it comes down to my patterns of thinking.
Yes. Wow.
And it comes down to, like we learn in biblical psychology, in Pastor Schaller's biblical psychology book, which I absolutely love. We learn here that emotions are responders. And he makes it very clear that emotions cannot think. And he is very clearly indicating here that emotions are responders to situations. However, the little thing in the middle of the situation and the emotion is my thinking. Like God is after our thinking. And that is where we sin, I think, is that when we have anxiety and worry, it in itself is not an ungodly emotion, but it is, and it's completely normal to feel anxious in a time of crisis. When you're anticipating something to happen, it's completely normal. But then when my thinking crosses over to exalting itself, my worry exalts itself above the knowledge of God in that situation, it's when it becomes sin and it no longer glorifies God.
Yeah, so, maybe we could just pause there, because that's a big thing you just said. Like, Satan is the great accuser, right? He's going to project onto our lives like this spirit of hopelessness or despair. He's going to project like our situation without God and say that's the real reality. Okay, you just lost your job. How are you going to pay your bills? He kind of makes it all inward. Where again, when we look up to God and have an attitude of prayer and waiting on Him, which are these lifelong things that we learn, right?
Yes.
How to wait on Him, how to pray, how to rest in Him.
Yes.
It minimizes anxiety, because now it's like, okay, Lord, I'm learning how to think with you,
Exactly.
right? Philippians 4:8.
Yes.
Think on those things which Colossians 3, which are those things which are above. Another interesting point that I want to highlight that you said, Philippians 2:5, right? Let this mind be in you. Like, what mind are we talking about? Like, again, we can get ahead of God, and we can get very anxious and very fearful, and very we can be wired to get angry immediately rather than processing these moments with prayer and quieting ourselves down and saying, okay, God, you obviously allowed this situation for something to be ministered to me, to grow us, let's say, and to lead us to the next thing.
Yes.
Right? Because look what Proverbs says. It says 12:19 or 12:25, excuse me. Anxiety in the heart of a man causes depression, but a good word makes it glad. So depression is a huge word we hear all the time, right?
Yes.
Like, I'm depressed and I'm, and we don't, again, like I like what you said, it's like we don't want to just have this secular viewpoint, but we want to just, okay, depression, like there's where we feel this pressure, there's maybe a compression, there's an oppression, right? We feel this tension in our lives. And where's the release? Well, it says there, a good word makes it glad. So going to the Bible, right, is a huge stress reliever.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's right. It's interesting you mentioned right there the depression, some of the really serious symptoms that can follow anxiety, living in long-term anxiety, can have like real results on your physical health, your mental health. Depression, like you mentioned, substance misuse, trouble sleeping. Can you imagine not being able to sleep because you're so anxious? Digestive problems, headache and chronic pain, social isolation. These are all from the Mayo Clinic website. I just looked it up, and so what do they say that are the symptoms of anxiety in one's life? And worst case scenario is suicide. You know, like people are desperate for answers.
Yeah.
So I think salvation and finding the Lord is the first one. But we are not, as Christians, we're not immune from being depressed. We're not immune from feeling anxious and feeling like a real sense of need in our lives. But the need that we have is the cross, actually, and taking personal responsibility for my emotions. I want to read to you something from this book, Pastor Schaller's Biblical Psychology. He talks about the desire, the third initiation from the devil to Eve when she was, considering eating from the tree. The third initiation was from Eve's emotions, and the tree was to be desired. Satan wanted Eve to desire the tree. And in the original Hebrew, the word desired also translates to covet. Desire and covetousness are emotional responses, and Eve's emotions desired what the tree of knowledge had to offer. And I bring this up because there's a verse in the Bible. Okay, now we've established that anxiety can be sin, right? It can be sin if it exalts itself above the knowledge of God in your situation. And then James 1:5, listen to this, 1:15. When lust has conceived, it brings forth sin. It's if we backtrack and say, what do I want? What do I desire? What am I coveting for? And it really puts the responsibility back on the believer to say, because the world does not want you to, it wants to define emotions as it's not your responsibility.
Exactly.
The devil wants you to think that it's not your responsibility.
Exactly.
My flesh does not want to take responsibility for my anxiety. I don't want to. So I go to the world and I get some medication and I get someone to tell me that I need to change my job, I need to change my husband, I need to change my situation, because I'm anxious if I'm bound to that situation, right? But really the problem is me. It's my flesh. And it's my flesh telling me that I don't want to die.
Yeah.
I don't want to die. I don't want to accept this situation. And in biblical counseling, don't we tell people that your situation may never change?
Yes.
It may never change.
We don't have a wand to wave.
Yeah.
I mean, because again, this idea of coming to the cross and dying, it's not a popular message, but it is the message of transformation.
Yes.
So we come, right, and we surrender. We present ourselves, we yield ourselves, and what happens? Maybe our situation doesn't change, but I change. I have victory in the situation. There is this understanding how to minister to other people that are captive to anxiety, the stresses of life, the anxieties, and then the fears, and then maybe it's something even in our past.
Yes.
Guilt, shame, and fear are like wrecking balls to the emotion. But I like what you keep saying, like we have to have responsibility for our emotions, because we're in an age where it's just very much like you live like you want. You're not hurting anybody. In one sense, you have to focus on you as the center, but actually what we're doing has a long-term effect on us mentally, physically, emotionally, and even spiritually. So
yes.
This idea of what is exalting itself?
Exactly.
What is exalting itself above the nature and character of God? Well, fear, worry, again, anxiety, all of these things can look very big. They can be magnified. Like, God is this big, he's very small, and my problem is larger than life. And
yes.
It's like we have to change that paradigm, and that only happens, like you're saying, at the cross, where
yes.
it's no longer I that live, but Christ. But I don't want to be religious in this sense. When we talk about the cross, we're really lifting up what Christ has done.
Yes.
It's not, yes, it's self-denial, but it's more like a shift. It's like saying, okay, God, I want what you have more than what I want, and you build an appetite, and therefore that transference
yes.
is now ruling my life, now changing now I have joy unspeakable. Or how about peace? Like there's peace when there's no reason, to have peace. Like I just met with a widow just an hour ago who just lost her husband, and she has peace and joy. How could that be?
How is that possible?
44 years of marriage,
yeah.
she has peace and joy. Mm-hmm. Is she anxious? Is she upset? Is she grieving? Absolutely. But the dominant or prevailing emotion, we could say,
yes.
is being controlled by the mind of Christ.
That's it. The mind of Christ is the key, because this widow that you're speaking about, her emotions are responding to her thinking, not to her situation. Because not everyone has the same response. You can look at people in the grocery store right before Christmas. You're trying to get everything. Everybody's, piling their carts up with things and running around, and you get to the register and, there's 10 people in front of you. You're trying to check out and you're already running late. You have one person who's completely anxious in that situation, gets frustrated, starts, yelling at people around them. And then the person behind can be in the same exact situation and is calm. Mm-hmm. And the emotions that are coming out of that person, that's what I mean when we kind of agree in the secular sense with their definition that our emotions do respond to the situation. But what we're inserting there in the middle from the biblical perspective is that our emotions are actually responding to our thinking.
Yes.
What we're thinking in the situation. Mm-hmm. And that puts the responsibility back on the person, on the individual. I need to know what I'm thinking in the situation, rather than saying, this situation is happening to me, and these emotions are also happening to me, and I have no responsibility whatsoever. Now just give me some medication to deal with this. So I think this is a huge point that is missing. It's like a missing piece of the puzzle in a lot of counseling today, is that we're afraid to tell people that there's your personal responsibility when it comes to your emotions. God has set you to be in charge of your own emotions. You do control what you think. Mm-hmm. You do control what you feel, or you can.
Yeah.
You can't control what the situations that happen in your life. You can't control other people. You can't control...
That's a big one.
Yeah. You can't control how other people speak to you, how they treat you. But what you can control is your response. And that stems from how you think. That is why the mind of Christ is such a big thing in the Bible, I believe,
And I think our world is so busy.
Yeah.
It's really a plague of just the compassion fatigue, as one writer has said it, because we're moving in so many different directions and everyone's getting a piece of you, right?
Yeah.
And you can't give yourself wholly to anything. So there has to be constant noise. There has to be constant talking. There has to be constant, just influx of stimuli. And it's like, of course, you're going to be, or any of us will be fatigued or tired, right?
Yes.
And we work all day, we give our best self to our work, and then we come home and we neglect the most precious thing in our world, and that's our family.
Yeah.
So the mind of Christ shows us how to prioritize. It also it helps us live in the moment, which is a big thing.
Yes.
A lot of people regret the past. They're fearful about the future and they're distracted in their present.
Yes.
Where the Bible is saying,
oh, that's good. Yeah.
Let's live today in the fullness of God. Because think about this. 1 Corinthians 7:32, Paul is saying, be free from anxiety. How do you do that? Looking to Christ. Isaiah 35:4, be anxious and fear not. Again, false evidences appearing real. One person said that acronym for fear. False, F-E-A-R, false evidences appearing real. It's like, how are we processing what we're seeing, what we're hearing?
Yes.
Are we overanalyzing ourselves? Like you said this, we have this personality attachment, or how did you say it? Like, as an anxious person, this is just who I am, this is how I'm wired. But the finished work, the Bible, it rewires us.
Yes.
Not that we're excited about bad situations, right?
Yes. Yeah.
I saw an accident driving to work today, and I thought, oh, Lord, what if I got in an accident? What would happen to me?
Right.
And the cascading of like the runaway train, I was like,
Yeah.
I was like, okay, Lord, instead of like imagining worst case scenario, I just want to pray, Lord, keep me. You know what I'm saying? So it's like how we respond.
Exactly. How about just worship?
There you go.
How about just worship? In the moment, if you don't know how to retrain your thinking out of that anxiety and out of the fear of the unknown of the future, like I used to be terribly afraid of death. Not death itself, but I was really anxious about how I was going to die. And I lived with like a really concrete fear in my life of like not really knowing how I was going to die, and it was making me anxious. And I just started rehearsing worship in that area of my life, and allowing God to really give me the peace in that. And now when I think of, I catch that thought, and I cast it as I'm, told to do in the Bible, casting every imagination. It's just an imagination. It's almost like I'm fantasizing about something that only God knows what's going to happen.
Wow.
And I'm building an entire system of emotional response on a fantasy.
Oh, you got to say that again. That's loaded.
Right?
Say that like it is. It's like this prefabricated idea that may never even happen.
Yes. And we do it all day.
Yeah, all the time.
We do it all day, every day. And we come up with an emotional response to that even when it's not even reality. And I think that there is a lot of behavior modification that can happen. We can learn not to be angry. We can learn not to be anxious. Those are all things that God has actually given us a tool to learn. And very often, like, you have the emotional wheel in front of you. This is, by a secular psychologist who came up with an emotional wheel, and it's changed through the years. But very often we are wired, like you use that word, wired, where we have a predisposition towards a certain emotion. And sometimes it can be anger. Like I just watched it in my childhood maybe, and my mom and dad were a certain way, and I think that this is the only way to deal with a situation. That's my automatic response to a situation. And God wants us to take ownership for that. And there can be behavior modification, but it has to be done from the heart of God, from really understanding why he wants us to have that transformation, not just so you wouldn't fight with people around you or, but that it would really be done from the heart of God. And I think this anxiety piece is huge because it comes from the fear. It comes from the fear color wheel part where, we can really, our emotional response can be automated to being anxiety. It can be automated. And we can almost ask ourselves, like, is this God's heart for me? Is this what I'm supposed to be feeling? Could I be feeling something else? I was talking to Seb as I came in here today, like, I'm not sure if I'm anxious or if I'm excited. And I just decided that all the anxiety that I was feeling about speaking about, publicly today was actually excitement. Yeah. And that was just a behavior modification that I did in my own life to overcome a hurdle that I was, experiencing today. But that has nothing to do with me taking responsibility for my deepest need before God,
Yeah, ownership, right?
Ownership, yeah.
Okay, Lord,
yeah.
I'm made in your image, therefore I want to respond to the right things, not react, right? There's that whole reaction where something hits us, it surprises us. It's like, our natural predisposition responds in probably a carnal way. But then the responding to God is like, okay, Lord, And I'm not saying this in an over-religious way. It's like, okay, God, this hurts. What I'm observing is could be traumatic. It could be even a toxic relationship. Mm-hmm. How do you respond? How do you set up boundaries? All these things, like responding to God, he gives you that wisdom so that you're not subjective, you're not under the situation, mm-hmm. but you're reigning above with him. Mm-hmm. And I think, again, taking ownership means, okay, Lord, what is my part in this?
Yes.
What is my part?
Yes.
Okay, staying in my lane. Like, okay, mm-hmm. I can't do everything, but I can do something, mm-hmm. right? It's like, okay, what is my part? Mm-hmm. And I think of John in the book of Revelations, like he's on the Isle of Patmos. He's in a severe situation. Mm-hmm. He was boiled in oil like 2 or 3 times. Mm-hmm. And that's a pretty significant situation. Mm-hmm. But what's his part? Well, his part is to write down the revelation of God. He's Acts 20.
Isn't that amazing?
Acts 20, wow. 24, 28. Yeah. He did not count his life dear unto himself. Yeah. He just says, okay, I may perish, but there's something greater than I am. Yes. Okay, in my situation, like I just talked to a 19-year-old that was struggling with thoughts of suicide, and I said, where is the leaking in the boat? Where is your hope being dissipated? And he goes, well, I'm not sure if God is good enough to give me a good future. Mm. Like, I don't know if I trust God with my future. Mm. And I said, what are the reasons why you wouldn't trust God? Like, he is God. And we started talking about who God is, and his mood changes. He began to relax. He began to process his thinking objectively. Mm. And it was like, okay, that same God of the Bible is the same God that lives inside of you, and it's the same God that's orchestrating your mm-hmm, future, right? Mm-hmm. So again, it's like taking ownership and then stewardship, right?
Yes.
Stewardship is now I act out on the principles of what God has said.
Yes.
And I think that separates religion from relationship.
I think so, yes.
Because we can fool people all day long.
Yes.
I can go to church on Sunday, and then the rest of the week I'm a hostage to my emotions.
Yes.
Or vice versa. We can be in the Word and just say, Lord, teach me. Psalm 55:22, I cast my burdens unto you.
Yes.
I cast all my care unto you. And if, let's say we are anxious, we recover quickly, right?
Yes.
We just recover. We say, okay, God, I'm losing my mind over here.
Yes.
Thank you, Lord.
Yes.
And we just recover.
That's it. Like, let's look at it practically. Like, let's say something happens. Now my aged parents, I found out that, I'm dealing with dementia, for example. Let's say that that's a reality for me now. And my mind starts going down that road, of like, oh my God, what's going to happen with this and that, and how am I going to manage this and that? And I can catch myself in that moment mm-hmm. and say, first of all, this situation is for me. It's for me. And God has designed this situation for me, that I would get to know him better mm-hmm. and that I would be drawn closer to him and become more like Christ in this situation. If that is my starting point, like Pastor Schaller's been speaking in the last couple messages, what is my starting point? Is it me and my situation and my response to the situation, or is it who is God in this situation? And I think that's really key for us when we're talking about especially anxiety, because our heads are so full of thoughts, and it's hard to kind of to even grasp them all, to take them captive, because they are so full of thoughts. But if you start with God, who is God? What is the purpose of this situation? Is to bring me closer to him. And Pastor Love said it last week. He said, how did he put it? I am defined by who God is. When Moses was at the burning bush, God defined who Moses was by answering to him who he is, who God is. And that's who we are. We define ourselves according to who God is in our lives and what he is doing in our lives. Mm-hmm. And if we can kind of make that first shift of thinking, the anxieties, I feel, they start to fall off. Then we can learn a way of freedom mm-hmm. out of anxiety.
I think that's important to understand that. What's my relationship with mm-hmm. truth? We can hear verses and words like love, mercy, grace, right? Mm-hmm. What's my relationship with those words will dramatically affect how I walk in those mm-hmm. things, right? Mm-hmm. One person said it like this. They said, when it's personal, it's powerful in your life. So if grace is personal in my life, which means I'm the greatest recipient or need of it, mm-hmm. then other anxious people in my life, let's say the unsaved, that's just very anxious and maybe you're in a line in Walmart and, like you said, people are flipping out.
Yeah.
It's like we can be gracious because by the grace of God, there goeth I, right? That could be me with no real boundary around our minds. And if we did not have the mind of Christ, we could be doing the same thing, if not even worse. But I love this. Our relationship with truth really helps us, I don't want to say enjoy the struggle, but find the purpose in the struggle.
Or be content in it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like I'm not praying for trouble.
Yeah.
I kind of like an uneventful day. Not that I have those, but it's like, okay, I want to have more than just a behavior of control, because we can look in control, but inside we can be a tornado, really. And then physically we're suffering, mentally, and at the end of the day you're fried, right?
Yeah.
But we can be filled and renewed in the spirit of our mind every day, all day.
Yes.
And I think as Christians sometimes we can think, we want to hide our humanness, but actually Christ was tempted in all points and even learned obedience through the things that he suffered. I mean, Christ was the greatest example, right? And so this emotional wheel, I just want to refer to something real quick. Like this emotional wheel, I like it because even though maybe we are predisposed to anger, we're the only ones that get ourselves angry, by the way. That's how we interpret things based on our own thoughts. But we can, instead of sadness or being alone or having this feeling of being afraid or embarrassed, we can have this mind of being accepted, Ephesians 1:6, confident in this very thing, that God who started a work will complete it. We can be excited. Like I like what you
said.
Joy, yeah. Worship, these things release the power of God.
Yes.
So I like those thoughts. But I know we're getting ready to close here, but one thing, Anna, I was thinking that we should talk about briefly is we've heard this principle of not just listening to yourself, but talking to yourself, right?
Counseling yourself, yeah.
Like Psalm 42, right? Oh, my soul, why are you disquieted within me? Like David said it often, bless the Lord, oh my soul. How do you talk to yourself versus listening to yourself? What are some practical ways you've done that?
I have it in caps here.
Great.
Psalm 139, search me, O God, and know my heart. I always start there, like, God, you have to show me. You have to show me where I'm supposed to grow and where I'm supposed to make realizations, like, that we could do that better. Not better, but we could do that in a way that brings real freedom in my life from emotional, but not just yoga or meditating or getting better sleep or exercising. Those are all wonderful things that will bless us when it comes to anxiety. But I think that really going before God, and this is the one thing that I wrote down here, is that I pray, I get on my knees and I pray and I give God my problem. And then when I'm done with my prayer, I pick my problem right back up again. And I keep on carrying it. Yeah. And like, what does it really mean to casting your cares on him? Like to be anxious for nothing. What does it mean? Is that I really truly in my heart, I accept that God is powerful and he has meant this for me. And I can trust him. I can really truly trust him that he has my best in mind. Even the situation might be painful. In that pain, rather than eliminating the pain, what am I supposed to learn in that pain of God's character towards me? So I think that, if I get up and I pick up the problem, nothing has changed.
Yeah.
Nothing has changed, and I haven't grown, and my thinking has to change about who I am before God, and my identity before God has to change.
Isn't that what counseling's all about? It's changing wrong thinking. But we're so used to thinking a certain way. We know our problems more than maybe we know God. We know our past more than we know our present with God. And we have to let go. I like what you're saying, okay, Lord, this is yours. One burden is too great for me to handle or hold on to. I give it to you. And then learning to not pick it back up again, not to reanalyze it, not to think solution, even though that's how we may be wired, solution-oriented. But God's like, well, I've allowed this situation either to detour you to another direction, to bring you deeper with me, or to really get your attention that you're going in the wrong direction.
Yeah, and isn't the most beautiful thing is about when we do leave it with God, then it becomes his responsibility.
There it is.
Like first we take the responsibility and I said, okay, these are not things happening to me. I'm the problem. I am the problem. My flesh is the problem. And if I go to the cross and I accept that I am the problem and I need to change and I leave it in God's hands, then it becomes his problem. And I can trust him that he's going to help me. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
What would you say to somebody that says, I can't stop worrying, I can't stop getting anxious, I'm up at night and I'm just in a cold sweat and maybe there's something that's captive? What do you say to them? What is
That's a really good question. Well, first of all, being anxious at night is not an ungodly thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
You know, but then to rehearse,
wow.
To go back and in that moment rehearse not the problem, not the worry, but to rehearse who God is in that situation.
Wow.
And just keep going back to him and rehearsing who he is.
Over and over,
yes.
repetition,
yes.
rehearsing, revolving. This brings it deeper into our hearts.
Mm-hmm.
And I like this contrast that we brought up today. 1 John 3:8, the works of God were manifested to destroy the works of the devil. So
yes.
if we put Christ at the center and we're in our Bibles, we're in prayer, and we're, again, whatever it might be, fear, failure, shame, whatever it is, it's not too big for God to deal with. And maybe it might be a process, right? It might be an ongoing, slow walk with God, but he's
yes.
walking with us.
Yeah.
And one thing I like to rehearse in my mind is how faithful God is.
Yes.
God, you have been faithful so far. Why would you change now?
Yeah.
Your thoughts to me are thoughts of peace and not evil. Like, you don't change. I
yes.
change. And that's kind of one of those pivotal points with anxiety is we get anxious because we've changed either our image of God or we've changed our image of self or we've forgotten truth.
Yeah.
And these are
or that we just desire. We desire, like Eve desired the tree of the good and, knowledge of good and evil. We might desire anxiety, actually.
Huh.
You might be at home and it might be the first thing that comes to you. It's like the sin that is conceived. It's that first desire in your heart that wants to be anxious. And that desire, God, teach me to desire you instead of anxiety or worry or, other things. It really comes down to what's in here, what's inside of me.
Yeah, people might like the attention.
Yeah.
They might like to over-talk. They might, but God is like saying a quiet and peaceable life is that which, glorifies.
Yeah.
And it's been great having you. You've a wealth of knowledge. We can go on here for a couple more hours, but I don't think we have that. But thank you, friends, for joining us today. And don't forget to subscribe to our show on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, and Spotify. And be sure to join us for our next episode. We're looking forward to having you there. All right, God bless you.